Joining. This is Nizam, and I'm from the Sparx Prolaborate team. Uh, in this session, we'll be looking at our attempt at using the generative AI capabilities within Prolaborate catered towards architecture use cases. And we have named it as Genie because it kind of is doing a lot of wonders, which was quite a lot of surprise for us as well. So we'll take a closer look at these. So as we all would have already seen everywhere, like generative AI, especially with the recent versions of the Chat GPT, has kind of taken the world by storm. And there is a whole array of applications that's kind of flooding the market for various intensive purposes. So this is one of the landscapes published by a popular venture investors firm, and that kind of shows there is applications being developed every minute towards various day-to-day activities, and everything is trying to improve our productivity. So it's not in no way it's going to be like replacing anything, in my opinion, but it's like definitely improving productivity significantly. And with investments from the Googles and Microsofts of the world, it has just changed the game completely. And what we have done is, we all have been using Chat GPT in one way or the other, but like many people say, we are just scratching the tip of the iceberg, is just asking it some basic queries. But we kind of realize there's a lot more that it is possible. So we were trying to figure out the use cases that will make an architect life much easier, or in other words, like architects and the consumers of architecture should be able to do things that they were not able to do in the past using these capabilities. And to this effect, we have identified a couple of use cases and have implemented that in the Prolaborate Genie, and they are listed in the screen. As you can see, the first thing is a documentation assistant. One of the primary activities that every architect ought to do when they do an architecture is to give a proper documentation for their artifacts and diagrams. And the AI, which is essentially towards the generative AI, should be able to give us a very innovative solution along those lines, and it does. When trained in the right way, it is able to understand the model, the meta model, the context of your element, and give you some incredible documentation. And we'll be looking at it in more detail. And the next thing is the summary or the conversation assistant. So there is the very important aspect of an architecture is collaboration. So we want to invite more people to give us their feedback and reviews and approvals and suggestions. And it's kind of always important to keep abreast of what's happening. And the summary assistant, uh, powered by the Gen AI capability, could go through all your conversations, understand the context, and understand who you are, and give you a precise, concise summary of whatever is happening. That will just save you incredible amount of time and will be giving you all the key pointers. And it will also help us in responding to it in an effective way. It will be able to give you a draft from your perspective, which you could just use, review, and publish. So that is another use case that we'll be looking at. And then this is my favorite, which is everyone can now interact with the model in just their own native language. It could be English, it could be French, it could be anything, because these tools can understand any language, but you don't have to be writing a script or a SQL or a report to get what you want. And you'll see certain demonstrations down this presentation. To me, it was quite fascinating when it was able to do what it did. So the model search to get the required insights from the model by just using simple English terms is really powerful. And then there is a chat agent that we have introduced. So we're also used to using chat agents in multiple websites, but add to it the power of the like AI, and then train it with your own documentation, train it with your own model contents, train it with your own meta model, and it could just transform the way you could interact with the chat agent and the responses it gives you. So that is also something that was quite interesting. And then the last use case, which is like integrated AI engines, this is step one that everyone who is experimenting with AI kind of say they are supporting AI, and all they would have done is integrated a chat GPT or a Bard user interface within an application. But we do support it, but the other use cases are more catered towards the consumers of architecture to make it incredibly easy for them to get what they want out of these architecture models. So to start with, I'm going to start with this summary assistant. And as I said, a summary assistant is something that can understand your conversations. So take, for example, there is a conversation where multiple stakeholders are giving feedback. They are referring to elements in a model. They are referring to specific diagrams, and they are specific, they're kind of specifying timelines. So there is a a lot of information that is in, like, that has been discussed in this conversation. There's Beth, Andy, Dave exchanging some comments on certain item, and what the summarizer and the response assistant could do is understand this conversation, understand who you are. That's even more important, because if I ask the same thing from another user's perspective, it it is able to give me a completely different summary. Like, the summary is going to be the same, but it kind of takes it from your perspective and gives you a different response. And it also helps me draft a response to this conversation. So instead of just talking through some slides, what I'm going to show is a quick demo of how this works. So I'm just going to take a diagram. I'm looking at the same conversation, like where Andy, Dave, Beth, and Beth have been talking. And what I'm saying to Genie is to just go summarize this for me. And what it does is, as I said, it reads these comments, reads who said what, and then it gives me a summary of this conversation. That kind of saves a lot of time for people who are really busy with various other things, and they will not miss a thing. So you could see that it kind of goes through the nuances of this discussion and gives you a summary, but that doesn't end there. So if I want to respond to, say, like, with just a short note where I'm saying, just keep me updated. And then if I ask the AI assistant to give me a response for it, it understands the summary and understands who I am, and then gives me a response which goes something like this. So, it just says what I need, what is important for me, and what you're expecting from others. And that's a pretty well drafted response that you could just use as your reply to this conversation. So that is kind of what the AI agent that has been trained to work as your, like, summarizing and like commenting age, like, assistant is able to do now. And the next use case is, as I said, my favorite, which is the search assistant. This kind of, we are hoping, we are still in the early stages of this. Like, this whole AI thing is kind of evolving. We are still in the early stages of this. And whatever we've been able to accomplish thus far is already fascinating. But what we are envisaging is an interface where people could just talk to your architecture tool and get what they want, be it reports, charts, graphs, whatever, should just be a normal English interaction with the tool. And you could see some of these use cases already proving it. So your search assistant will, eliminate the need for having any SQL queries or reports to get anything meaningful. The AI engine can be trained with your model contents, with your meta model. That's even more important. So model contents, yes, I think it's fairly, I mean, it's relatively straightforward, but it can understand your meta model. How are things connected in my model? What kind of connectors are used? What kind of tagged values are there? So all the technical stuff that you would have in a meta model is now understood by the AI engine, and it can give you the results for a normal query, and it can also convert those results into meaningful intuitive visualizations. So just to take a quick example, I'm going to ask a few queries. So let me just start with a very simple query. Say, like, give me the list of applications that are hosted in SaaS. So what it means is it is going to my model. It's understanding there is a tag value called hosting type, and it gives me the applications that has a value of SaaS set, and it's a proper tag value. This is not something like a text. It's a tag value which has like the label of the tag is hosting type and the value is SaaS. So it kind of is able to get me that. And now if I want to refine it further, I'm going to add one more criteria to say the total cost of ownership should be less than 2 mil. And now what it does is it goes and finds me the applications that are in SaaS and with the total cost of ownership less than 2 mil. So what we are seeing is like actual results which are clickable and navigatable. And this is even more interesting because what I'm asking to this chat agent is, or to this AI engine is, give me the set of applications that are to be sunset before 2030. So I have a tag value called sunset, and I have a date given for it. And it's able to quickly go to my model, understand which applications are going to be sunset before 2030 and give me a list. So all these are, or like, if you want to get something like this today, you need an architect to help you to write a query or build a report to get this. But now we could see that it's almost like an interaction to the model, and you're able to get these results. And the next three use cases, what I'm going to demonstrate is even more immersive, where I'm going to key in a query, let's say to get a hierarchy of elements. So I'm going to say, give me the domains, the subdomains, and the applications in a hierarchical manner. So in this EA model, there is an underlying meta model where a domain is composed of multiple subdomains, and a subdomain could have multiple applications, and these are connected using certain connectors. So this AI engine is able to understand that meta model and translate your simple query into something that is meaningful and give you a result of your domains, subdomains, and applications from your model. Again, people who've been using EA or any tool for that matter, you could imagine to get something like this is also interesting. You need to define some kind of a query or a report to get this, but this is kind of happening because your engine is trained. And more than that, it can also convert this result into a meaningful visualization. So I'm just telling the Genie to convert the available hierarchy information as a landscape, and it was able to build one for me. Now I'm going to try something else to say, get me the list of applications with total cost of ownership and data classification. So again, you could see that I am using a combination of words with spaces, words without spaces. That really doesn't matter. It is able to clearly understand what you're asking. Go look at the meta model and the model and get us the intended results. And as it identifies certain type of data being returned, it's also highlighting which graph or chart will be meaningful. So it's kind of graying out the things that wouldn't apply and just highlighting what is applicable. So I mean, these are all clickable items. So these are not just a simple list even. You can click on it and navigate to those items. At the same time, you can also convert the result to a visualization that it suggests. So in this case, it's a bar chart. And Prolaborate 5 has a way to not just use one parameter. I've built this chart based on one parameter, but then it is also able to, it would have also allowed me to switch to another parameter as well. So I started with application or data classification, but in the drop down, I'll have all the other tags that I could use as well. Now coming back, I want to just try with another combination where I'm going to get a list of applications grouped by certain attribute, and it is a straightforward query. I just get the result. It says you could convert it into a pie chart in this case, and then I just go click on pie, and that will render a pie chart for me, which is interactive, which could be used to explore further. I mean, as you would do in a Prolaborate dashboard or a Prolaborate chart. So these use cases that we just saw, where you are able to use a simple English query, or I mean any language, normal language query, into meaningful reports and charts that will help us get the required insights, is in our opinion, we have just again taken a few steps towards it, and we are able to see some incredible results, but we are continuously working on making and improving this, and the more we train it, it's able to do a lot more. But this use case is something that was quite fascinating for me. And then the chat, as I said, like the chat that we have included, not like a normal chat that we see with some preloaded data. This is powered by the AI engine, so it could do a lot more than what we usually expect. And the three use cases that I'm going to demonstrate is how it can be trained with your own PDFs and documents and RTFs or whatnot. So if you have a document repository, you could feed that to your engine, and it can read all those documents and understand it. So it could be trained on your own documentation, and then it can also be trained on your meta model and model. And then obviously it could also be open to get information that's available in the public. So it knows when to use what and give you the right response. So the use case, before I get into the use case, I want to quickly give an overview of what I have in my model so that you would appreciate how it is able to interpret it. So I've got a meta model which has application and a couple of artifacts around it. This is my APM meta model, and an application has a number of connectors, one of which includes integrates. So it has part of, provides, consumes, and various other connectors. But then one of them is an integrate connector. So that's the connector that we have zeroed in to connect two applications. And that integrate connector is expected to have an integration type, an interface mode, and an integration status. So these are the specific tags that are embedded in a specific connector that is used between applications. So that's the kind of nuance that the AI engine is able to understand and be trained on. So now to take a quick look at the demo. So I'm going to start with a query, which essentially looks at the documentation that I have given it. So I've trained it with my APM specific documentation, my meta model specific documentation. So what I'm asking is, what are the attributes of an integrate connector in APM? So that's a question that is usually asked, based on a help document or something like that. So it goes to the available PDFs and documents that it understands, and it gives me a response which says the attributes of an integrate connector in an APM are the integration type, interface mode, and integration status. So it could exactly find the information that we want. And now the second use case, what I'm going to do is to ask something that will be model specific. So I'm asking it to give me the list of applications with complexity greater than 4. So it will be able to identify that this is a model specific query. So it goes back to the model and gets me the applications that matches this particular criteria. Though it's not a clickable link, but it gives me the exact results that I want from my model. And the last use case with the chat that I want to demonstrate is how it could also access the publicly available information, where I'm just asking what is the latest Archimate standard. As much as it knows from the publicly available information, it could just search and give me the intended results. So it just says, the latest one is Archimate 3.1. So three use cases that we saw with chat. One is how it's able to understand the documents that we have used to train it. And then secondly, it's able to understand the model. And the third, it's able to reach to the public information and get us the required details as well. And the most important aspect here is it is able to differentiate where to look for a query. So it is able to identify if something is a document based one or a model based one or a public query. So the kind of intelligence that it kind of develops as we train it is remarkable, and that was evident in this small demonstration. And the last use case that I want to emphasize on is the documentation assistant. Again, another really interesting use case in my opinion. Like as an architect, as a modeler, I've spent like hours together to create a diagram and then document it in the right way. And we will have quite a lot of information in our model. So there is going to be a diagram, there's going to be tagged values, there's going to be connectors. So you have all these in a diagram, but then to create a documentation that you could share to someone requires some effort. Of course, there's documentation engines in EA which can be configured to get the documentation. I'm not denying it, but if you could use the power of the Gen AI to just simplify it and display a summary of anything that you're looking at, that will be a significant way to reduce the additional efforts in generating documentation. And the documentation assistant in the current implementation of Genie could do a couple of things. One is it could understand your diagram and give you a concise summary of whatever is in that diagram, like elements and connectors and the metadata around those elements and connectors. Again, this is something that you could train it on. So you could give it a completely different template and it will be able to give you a documentation based on that template. Again, I'm not talking about headers, footers kind of a template, but if you say, I don't want to look at tag values, I don't want to look at the connectors, rather I want to look at it in a different way, it will be able to understand it and give you a documentation in a different way. So beyond summarizing the diagrams, it could also give us documentation for a selected artifact or an element. And that is also really, really strong. Like at the moment, what we have is a couple of variations of how it authors that documentation. So there's a summarized, like a concise way or an elaborate way, and something that could include the tag values or exclude the tag values. So these are the options that we have opened up so far, but the opportunities are endless. So what we are also contemplating is to possibly integrate with something like a Flexera Technopedia or CMDB systems or whatnot to get that information. But at the moment, it's more a context driven documentation that we have trained it on, and it is learning. It's the way it could be trained is also fascinating, because if I give it another template and say this is how I want the document, it quickly adapts to it and gives me a completely different documentation as well. So just to show you this in action, so the first thing is we'll start with summarizing a diagram. So I'm just taking this simple integration diagram and asking the Genie to summarize it for me. So there are 4 applications and some integrations between them, and each integration has an integration type, interface mode, and things like that. So it's just reading the diagram, understanding what's in it, and it's kind of giving me a summary of it. So it kind of says it includes connectors, it includes so and so objects, and between Amazon Connect and a building system there is a connector, and that connector's interface mode is this, integration type is this. So it kind of gets me all the details, because that's how I have trained it so far. I wanted to understand the tag values, I wanted to understand the connectors and the elements, and give me a summary. So that is a quick summary that the AI engine created for me based on this diagram. And the second part of the documentation use case is how we could document an element. So in this case, let's say I just click on Amazon Connect, and I've created a placeholder to say I have to document it. And to help me document it, I'm using Genie to help me draft it. And as I said, we have just explored some basic use cases, like a simple one, an elaborate one, something that includes your properties or just does it based on general available information. So in this case, I've chosen a simple response or a simple document with properties included. And what it does is it kind of goes through all the tagged values that has been set for this particular object, and then it gives me a summary of what each one are, and then it also adds its intelligence. It says, hey, it's going to be expiring in the next year, you might have to be cautious about it. So it kind of gives you its intelligence added to the exact tags that's been set for it as well. But this is a really smart way to summarize everything about that application, and you could save it as a document. Again, as I said, we are just exploring this, and there's a lot more that we could do. We could connect this to external systems like the Technopedia or external CMDB systems. There's a lot of opportunities, but this is what we have achieved. And once the documentation is in place, you could just say use this draft. So it kind of, you could regenerate it if you want to have a different draft. It's pretty much how you use ChatGPT. You could say just regenerate response. But once I am comfortable with it, I could just say use draft, and that would add it to the documentation part or the notes part of an element, and you save it, it gets stored into, like, saved to your diagram. So that's something that you would expect from Prolaborate. So I could just use this draft and save it, and this documentation gets saved to my EA model as well. So just recapping what we saw. So there are certain use cases that we identified, and we wanted to do something that is meaningful. So we didn't want to just show something to say, hey, we are also working in AI. We wanted to do something that will make the task of an architect relatively easier. We wanted to do something that will make a business user or end users uh, experience much more efficient and smoother. So we identified certain use cases, and the key use cases are the documentation, the summary, the model search, and the chat. And the document or the context database results and the general AI results are incorporated in all of these. So if I use the chat or if I use the search, it also understands these two as well. So we have just taken these 6 use cases and I've tried to refine it to our best ability in the to deliver these use cases, but it's a continuous process. So it's not done yet. It's evolving. However, whenever I mention about AI to people, the first thing that strikes is how confidential it is, like how safe it is. Like, can I use this for my actual enterprise data? And there's a lot of reluctance to do it, but there is an answer. There is a lot of new ways coming up as well. So the fundamental behind this is the foundation models, as you may all know. So the large language models have particularly been used to do this, and it's not the chat gpt, the latest version, that introduced it. It's been happening for a while. There are private llms, there are public or open source llms, which has been in the development by all key players, and these are available for users to use. And some of the vendors, so we are in discussion with both AWS and Azure, mainly AWS, to set up SageMaker kind of an instance, which is private, which will be like, specific to an organization. We could build a model, we could train it on your data, and it is going to be confidential and isolated. Similarly, Azure OpenAI, which is different to the common public OpenAI, is also something that we are working on. If our users want to start with Prolaborate and AI capabilities, they don't have to always use the public open AI. They could opt for Sage, like the Amazon service or the Azure service to get started. And just to emphasize it a little more, this is taken from the Microsoft documentation to address the key concerns that people usually come up with. Like, if you are going to use one of these services from Azure or Amazon, they're going to be not the public ones. So they're going to be specific to your organization. It will be trained within your organization's data. Whatever you share to that model will not be exposed to the OpenAI models. It will not be exposed to anything back to the vendor or any other models. So it is, and there's a lot of improvements happening here. So it's not very mature. It's continuously evolving, as you can imagine, but there's already services available which will help us have an isolated environment for ourselves. And what's next Like, what have we done so far is what I've shown to you, but we are continuously improving it to make, or we are kind of envisioning something which will reduce the effort from both architects side and the end user side, and make the architect's role even more compelling, because a good model, a consistent meta model, and well-defined data that is maintained will all become absolutely essential. We can't just do a diagram and shelve it and say I've been doing architecture for a while. That will not work. We need to maintain it. We need to keep it current, because everyone can now access your architecture. Everyone can now get insights from your architecture repository. So it will become even more mainstream. And we are trying to explore these use cases even more, further. So what you could do is, if you would like to have an early access to something like this, and if you are a Prolaborate customer, if you have open api account, if you don't mind just trying it with an open api account, you could do it. If you have a SageMaker service account or an open ai Azure open ai instance of your own, we could configure it for you with your own apis, and you could try it. We are also working, as I said, we are also working with Azure AI service and Amazon SageMaker services to be able to have something that is spin up, that any Prolaborate users could try. However, this will be a common instance, and whatever you share may become available to other Prolaborate users. So it's a bit of a concern. That's where the discussions are, happening. We are trying to get some clarity. However, if none of this will work for you immediately, but if you're contemplating using AI in the longer run, and if you think of an interesting use case that you want us to consider, please do reach us or share to us. Our R&D team has been looking out for new ways or new use cases to implement. Of course, there isn't any other architecture tool which has come this far. We have taken a closer look at what some of the vendors has done. Linux has something which is just 2 use cases out of the 6 that I spoke about. There are other vendors we are trying to do it, but we have taken inspirations from other other tools, like other applications developed for various other purposes, and applying it for architecture. So if you have a feedback or a use case that you think will be useful, do share your opinion. Of course, there was a presentation by Tom and Peter in this webinar, which was the model side use case. So all we are showing in Prolaborate is the consumer side or the user side use cases, how to get insights, how to use the data that is available. What Peter demonstrated was how to create a model using the chat GPT functionality. A combination of these two could be really powerful as well. So you may expect something that is combining these two capabilities made available for you as well. So that's a quick idea to see what we expect from the audience here. I would say actually I should say this is still in the beta stage. Like, we have accomplished some powerful use cases as I demonstrated, but I would still say there's a lot of room to improve and make it even more stronger. And what we are working on is, this is how we rate our product so far. So documentation assistant, it's good. It's just opened up a world of opportunities, but the way we need to train it, we still have to spend a fair bit of effort to make it really proficient. Similarly, like the meta model and model based understanding, we have managed to train it, but we have to test it in various other combinations. We are still training it in a controlled environment. I always believe in a proper use case driven, meta model driven approach, and that's what we've been training it on. But EA users use it for all intensive purposes. So there'll be 100 types of diagrams with 200 different stereotypes in it. We haven't given that kind of a model to it to get trained, so it's still a work in progress. Model insights, I mean, both are kind of related. So we can say for a proper meta model, it works incredibly well, but the unknown cases are something that we need to test more. And then the summary and reply assistant, in our opinion, is working almost flawlessly. It can understand the context, it can understand who is asking the question and who is intending to reply, and it gives you but really precise responses that are meaningful. So this is kind of a quick snapshot of where we think the product is, and we are continuously trying to improve more as well. So if you have suggestions or feedback, or if you want to just enable this in your own instance, do reach us, and we'll be able to assist further. That's all I want to share.